I call the Honourable Member Rahui Katani. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Thank you. A fortnight ago in Rotorua at the New Zealand Dairy Business Conference, Waikato Tainui's Te Aratauda Chairman Tuku Morgan told delegates that farmers and iwi shared an intergenerational interest in the land and what it produced. He went further and laid a simple challenge to the industry. Work with us. Work with iwi across the country in genuine partnership. In his kōrero, he referred to Māori cultivation of the land prior to its alienation and seizure. He brought out also the critical role that Princess Te Puia played in establishing New Zealand's dairy industry when she bought land and began building a dairy herd in the 1920s. Mr Speaker, this bill threatens to disrupt this relationship by introducing uncertainty around Subpart 5, Part 2 of the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act 2001. This subpart is the one which promotes the efficient operation of dairy markets in New Zealand by regulating the activities of Fonterra to ensure New Zealand markets for dairy goods and services are contestable. The bill states that it will provide for a new process for the expiry of the pro-competitive measures when the new specified market thresholds are reached. In its effect, the new legislation provides for a more detailed approach in determining when the threshold is met and increases the threshold to 20%. The new legislation effectively empowers the Minister of Agriculture to forcibly enact the expiry of this subpart in the event that the threshold is met. So why is this such a concern? Let me go back to the points raised by Tuku Morgan. A review of the Māori commercial asset base for Te Puni Kōkiri in November 2003 showed that there were 436 Māori authorities with substantial businesses. What we know also is that farming an area of 720,000 hectares worth an estimated $7.5 billion, Māori are the largest natural grouping of pastoral farmers in New Zealand. In fact, given the collective nature of their land holdings and the number of shareholders they support, there's also a strong case for saying they're the most sustainable farmers in New Zealand. Mr Morgan's challenge to the dairy sector was to take the relationship between iwi and farming to a new level. He promoted the urgent need to recognise Māori concepts associated with the land, such as tikanga, heritage, kaupapa, conceptualisation of Māori knowledge, and kaitiakitanga, guardianship, to work together and create a more environmentally, culturally and socially sustainable dairy industry. Enter Miraka. Miraka Limited is a new entrant to the dairy processing industry and is constructing a plant at Mokai in the heart of the Waiariki electorate, 30 kilometres northwest of Taupō. It will commence operations in August 2011. Miraka is backed by a group of Māori trusts and corporations that have a combined asset base of over $1 billion. These organisations include Wairarapa Moana, Tuaropaki Trust, Waipapa No. 9 Trust, Hangaroa Partnership, Tauhara Moana Trust, Huiaro Farms, and the Māori trustee is also an investor. As a majority Māori-owned and controlled dairy company, Miraka is here for the long term. Miraka's owners share a vision of sustainable business practices, securing long-term returns for current and future generations from land that will never be sold. And yet, if this legislation proceeds unchallenged, it may well be that the unique partnership that Miraka can bring to the dairy sector is compromised, in fact sacrificed, under the possibility of a restricted public market. In the current arrangements, there are consistencies between the current Subpart 5 of the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act 2001 and kaupapa of rangatiratanga, as the current subpart provides for effective regulation and transparency of Fonterra's activities within the dairy industry. So it ensures that despite its dominant market position, Fonterra operates in an environment that is contestable, such that it faces potential competitive pressure. But what this new legislation proposes to do is to provide for the subsequent expiry of Subpart 5 to be timed to enable any future government to review and or amend, if required, the pro-competition provisions of the Act to meet policy objectives of the time. In short, Mr Speaker, various dairy operators in the sector are telling us that it is unwise to leave the door open in a way that may expose the dairy industry and independent processors such as Miraka to an unacceptable level of risk. As the House will know, there is currently a significant amount of attention on the dairy industry, particularly relating to Fonterra's capital restructure proposal, the review of the raw milk regulations, the domestic retail price of milk, the way in which Fonterra calculates the price it pays its farmer for milk, known as the farm gate milk price. The Māori Party is acutely aware of the heightened levels of public concern about the level of competition in the domestic market, as well as claims of anti-competitive behaviour by Fonterra and the effect these have on the price of milk. Now, I want to acknowledge the initiative that has been taken by the Commerce Commission in undertaking some preliminary work to determine whether a formal investigation into the price of milk is warranted. That was great news for our constituents. The Māori Party had called for a commission investigation into milk prices because of the claims that Fonterra had an effective monopoly in collecting over 90% of the milk produced in New Zealand. The advice that we received from consumers and dairy producers alike was the concern related to the proposed share trading proposal and that it would sacrifice a fundamental principle which guarantees farmers easy entry into and exit from Fonterra, the world's largest dairy exporter. As is now well known, of course, the Commerce Commission decided it will not hold an inquiry into milk prices, but it did suggest that it was open to hearing arguments. Mr Speaker, this debate has ranged far and wide across the impacts and effects of the dairy industry legislation. And while one might say that this legislation is not specifically focused on Fonterra's plan to introduce share trading amongst its farmers, I have to say that there is simply too much uncertainty around to be able to agree to repeal and replace the provisions which promote the open markets. This bill is being read in a volatile environment. We know that the Federation of Māori Authorities, for instance, has indicated concerns around the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry's discussion paper on a regulatory regime to accompany Fonterra capital restructuring. The underlying premise in this legislation is that there is unlikely to be sufficient competition in the dairy industry to ensure the efficient operation of New Zealand dairy markets. And yet, as FOMA will tell us, there is significant scope to not only lift the performance of dairy producers, as well as to also build on linkages between producers, processors and marketeers to capitalise on value chain opportunities within the dairy industry. We agree with FOMA that an open entry and exit mechanism is essential for a competitive dairy market. We also believe that a full and informed investigation needs to be completed by the Commerce Commission before we can be in a position to support this bill going through. To this end, the Māori Party cannot support this bill at its second reading.